This is the last of the regular presentations in this series of Cover Crops 101 or Basics of Cover Crops. And this one isn't necessarily about cover crops so much as it is about biology, but we felt like it was important because the way God created these systems to work, the plants and the biology have to work together, have to work together. And so they really can't be separated. So we felt like it's very appropriate to include this in a basics webinar series. So we're glad that you're here. Our presenter today will be Dylan Kuhn. As Jonathan mentioned, Dylan is part of our sales team. He's been on our sales team for how long, Dylan? Now 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, a little over three
A little
years.
over 3 years. He is a Kansas resident, so he lives in Victoria, Kansas, down by Hayes. And he and his wife are well, so you're going to be having your third child here in just a few hours, Eric.
Yeah,
So,
less than 24
growing
hours.
family and growing knowledge of cover crops and biology. And so Dylan has kind of become our biological expert on the team. He works with a lot of the companies that are providing some of our biological products. So, we felt like it was appropriate for him to lead this webinar, and then he and I will handle questions at the end here. And then whatever we don't get to, we'll handle in the Ask Me Anything next week. So, Dylan, go ahead and share your screen and take it away, and I'll jump back on when you're done and we'll take questions.
That look good there, Keith?
Yep, I can see it. You're
Okay.
good.
Well, thank you then for that introduction, Keith. Yeah, so today, really just going to cover biology basics, and kind of walk through, what is in the soil, what we're wanting to see, how to know where it is in the soil, and then, steps to improve that biology, whether that be steps on your own or with other companies that we may work with. So, this is really just a basic talk. There are certainly at the end, there are other resources I have that I'll kind of direct you to that maybe get more into some advanced talking of some of the biology. So, um, I want to start with, what is the biology? So I did a Google search and it just says the plants and animals of a particular area. So, when we're talking of a particular area, we're talking of our soil, and really that's living organisms in the soil from the smallest bacteria all the way up to, the larger animals, like maybe if you're grazing a ruminant animal, even walking across there. All of those species have a certain function within the soil that, make, that can help with, residue breakdown, nutrient availability, aeration of the soil. There's so many different jobs that each one of these have. And you can kind of see in the soil food web here kind of how that is laid out within these topics. Um, so why do we want to increase the biology in the soil? Think of the soil as the stomach of a ruminant, your own stomach. We have to have this living fungi and bacteria in there to break down um, food sources that are in that soil to make it available to the ruminant's body, our own body, to help us access nutrients out of that. Yes, we're not necessarily fending off insects, but your plants that are growing, think of that as your body and how you fend off disease and insects and just really overall health. And there's certain different biological properties that can really help access things that are just not otherwise available to that plant. So how do you know if you have biology active and working in your soil? As the picture depicted here is of earthworms. That's really a good starting point. It's one of I guess it's a larger organism, compared to something like a bacteria or a fungi, but that's a good visual observation to see and to be able to count. You can do earthworm counts per square foot. These guys are a really great great carriers of organic matter that's on top of the soil, take it down into the soil, which turns into food source for the smaller biology that's in there. And they really can help to open up and aerate that soil to allow water and oxygen into the soil. Because remember, the biology is a living organism. So like any living organism, it needs air to breathe. And if we have compacted soil that is not infiltrating, water or oxygen, it's just not going to be alive. So these guys are really great indicators of how that starts. Um, and so as you're out there, just get you some shovels and dig and see if you have earthworms in your soil. Another good starting point to start to indicate, where you're at in your biological properties in your soil. A Haney soil test is a good general soil health parameter developed by Dr. Rick Haney. This happens to be a Haney soil test that I got from Austin Cisneros with Elevate Ag. He looks at these quite often and kind of gave me an example of one here to kind of talk through. This is from Regen Ag Labs, and they do Dr. Rick Haney actually works for Regen Ag Labs, so it really they do a very nice job of promoting these or to offer these soil test scores. So a couple couple things that are indicators to look at is you look down at the soil health score, the soil respiration number. So as you look at that number, that's telling you how much CO2 is given off of your soil sample. I think within a 24-hour period. I'd have to read for sure again, but that's your microbes breathing. So the higher that number is, that's telling you the higher the higher activity level of the microbes in your soil. The next number as you look over is the organic carbon. And that's really just the home of the microbes. So how good of a home do you have? And then how well is your soil cycling with the microbes in there? And then the MAC percentage really is just an indicator of how happy are your microbes. And there's certain number of parameters that they have as they've collected data that indicate, what is best and for each of these microbes. So this is a good start, to if you want to start taking, I call this kind of a base, this would be kind of a base soil test to start looking at these to indicate, living biology in your soil. The next probably, step up from that would be a PLFA test. Again, this one's done through Regen Ag Labs. And really this gives you a number of who's in your soil, not necessarily a detailed explanation of who's in there, but just how much of, fungi, bacteria, protozoa, bacteria, things like that, and gives you an idea of where your soil would rank. So in this example, your fungi to bacteria is average. I think that number, if you can get that 1 to 1, that's usually a pretty good level to be at. The protozoa to bacteria, so you're looking at, predator to prey relationship there. If you're all bacteria, well, you don't have enough predators to break down that bacteria, which then starts to make the nutrients that bacteria is consumed available to the plant. And just, kind of, and then also really gives you a number of, your functional diversity within the soil and how diverse the biology is in your soil. So, a step up from the Haney. So, a little bit more of an investment into that, but can give you some indication, more of a detailed indication compared to the Haney. The next testing parameter is it's called a microbiometer. So this is a more of an in-field test. As you're out there in the field, you can utilize this to give you kind of a snapshot of microbial biomass and your fungi to bacteria ratio. You simply get your soil into a solution. There's some cards and you pipette some of that solution on there, and you can see as the color changes, it'll kind of give you an indication of what the microbial biomass is, and then your fungi to bacteria ratio. You can get these kits at microbiometer.com. We also have a YouTube video kind of explaining about this microbiometer and how it can be utilized on your operation. As we transition from just regular soil tests to at-home testing to a more in-depth look at your soil, we go to DNA sequencing. And this is really looking at the individual species in there and kind of identifying, their jobs and what they're doing. Laura Kavanaugh, the chief science officer with AEA, does a really good job of this. And in fact, she has a blog post kind of going over this and what it can do and what you can gain from it. Keith has also done a podcast with her, also explaining that. And if you're looking to really get to know more, she will actually be at our Nexus Field Day with Nicole Masters, June 3rd and 4th. So there'd be an opportunity there to maybe hear from her in person and maybe get a chance to ask her some questions around how this DNA sequencing could help you and in your operation. And then the next, another in-depth look at what is in your soil, more so than just a broad approach is metagenomics testing. And here are two companies that we have worked with and are working with Biomakers and Rise Bio. They can really give you specific names of those microbes and give you counts of those microbes and kind of let you know what their jobs are and what they're doing for you in the soil. Of all the testing that I've explained, this is definitely going to be the largest investment. But so if you're really into wanting to get like a really detailed look at your soil microbial activity, these are some tests to look at. I believe they can do soil and compost testing. They can do it, test it on the seed in the soil and kind of give you an idea of how some of that stuff is working for you. So that really, that kind of sums up how do we know if we have biology in the soil and how do we know if it's working in the soil? So now that you know that, where that level's at, maybe the level's not as high as you'd like it to see, or maybe it is where you'd like it to see, but you really want to continue to grow that biology and advance that biology. So how do we grow and add biology to the soil? There's several different ways. There's natural ways of doing it. There's at home, there's at home ways you can grow and grow your own biology. And of course, there's also companies that we work with that can really, really help to grow that biology, add diversity to the seed and to the soil. So really the first and really probably obvious one is just growing it with a living, diverse root as long as possible. Plants are what feed the biology in your soil, from them going through photosynthesis and pumping that carbon and sugar down into the soil, which feeds the bacteria, and the bacteria feed the larger species. And then as the bacteria is, broken down and excreted from these predators, then the nutrients get fed back to the plant. It's really a give and take relationship there. Keith has a really nice presentation on carbonomics and kind of how some of this works in the soil through this root exudates and plant and biology relationships there. So, we have several pre-made mixes, custom mixes, different plants turn on different biology in the soil, make different things available in the soil. So, certainly reach out to us and we can really help you maybe try to dial in what you're looking for there. Another way is really growing your own compost. The Johnson Sioux compost has been really a popular one, and we have a YouTube video with Dr. David Johnson and his wife, Dr. Sue there, and they have it's kind of a it's kind of a year-long process of how this compost breaks down and you get a really fungally diverse compost that I believe you can either apply it, directly to the soil, you can put it into a solution and make an extract. Um, Jay Young, we did a webinar series with Jay. He does it on a very large scale, and running it in furrow, foliar, I think is a seed treatment as well. So check out those YouTube videos that can really give you an in-depth conversation around those. Another option would be this Guardian of the Grains. So they have IMOS, Indigenous Microorganism Solution. So they can help you learn how to produce these, how to grow these. So they're more native microbes to your area, which in turn, that is what's growing and is effective in your area versus maybe bringing in something. I think it's still advantageous to bring in um, diverse biology from other areas. Really much like, people move from different areas to different areas. The diversity is great, but you still want that native biology there because they know the soil, they know the plants that can grow there, they know the environment, and they can all work together to really help grow that biology. So there's the Guardian of the Grains. You can check out their website, and they have a you can they have like how-to videos and can help you learn how to grow that. The next, so if you're not if you're not maybe wanting to build your own compost, it's time consuming. There's a lot that goes into it. Maybe you just don't have the time. Um, you can certainly biology as well. And we have several different companies that we work with to be able to add it to the seed, which helps get that seed off to a good start and helps to start building that biology in the soil. So the first product that I'll go over is our Rhizobac Extend. This is an exclusive product that's made for us from a company we work with called Umahari. This is a legume rhizobia product that helps to inoculate all of our cool season and warm season legumes, which they need to have that rhizobia bacteria in order to nodulate and help them fixate the nitrogen, you know, from the atmosphere to help them grow and to be able to add some back to the soil. Also with this product, you get some azospirillum and azotobacter, which are free living nitrogen fixing bacteria. So they'll be able to help attach to the non-leguminous plants to help them fixate a little bit of nitrogen for themselves as well. And then also some Pseudomonas, which is a phosphorus solubilizing bacteria. So some of those soils that have a high calcium load, especially that lock up a lot of phosphorus, this is a good way to start breaking that apart, at least making it available to the seeds that you do plant. This, we apply this to probably 95% or more of our mixes. You can also buy this product from us separately to add to any legumes that you may have otherwise. Another product from Umahari that is exclusively made for us is our Mycogreen NPK. So with this product, you get 10 species of a mycorrhizal fungi with a very high propagule count. So 250,000 propagules per the application rate, which is 5 grams per acre. So the mycorrhizal fungi is super important in the soil in the fact that it's an extension of the root hairs. So mycorrhizal fungi can certainly access water and nutrients that the plant may not otherwise be able to. I like to think of it as as your roads in between your towns. That's how you transfer nutrients back and forth from town, from plant to plant or services and products. So really, really important in the soil and in this product. It also has an azotobacter, a free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. It also has a couple bacillus products that are phosphorus and potassium solubilizing, and then a few bacteria in there for better disease or better root disease suppression. This can be applied on the seed and in furrow. You want to get this as close to the seed as possible because mycorrhizal fungi does need a living root to grow. So it will hang out there in the spore or propagule form until the conditions are right for them to propagate. So when you're applying this to the seed, it's best to have a liquid carrier with it, and the same with the Rhizobac product. And we do have a YouTube link of how to properly apply these as well. If you go to our YouTube page, I did a demonstration on how to apply these, mixing these with a liquid product and applying it to the seed. And the liquid product we really like to use, and I use this in about all of my mixes, is elevated fungi. And what this product is just a very diverse fungal inoculant. Has 90 plus different species of both saprophytic and mycorrhizal fungi. Again, on the seed, in furrow, and foliar applied. So what this product does, it helps to get these seedlings off started, get them very vigorous, helps increase vigorous root growth, and then really effectively utilize nutrients that are already in the soil. So that's where that fungi really comes into play, making those other nutrients available in the soil. So product like this is what we like to use to blend our Rhizobac or our microgreen, because Rhizobac and microgreen, 5 grams per acre rate, very low use rate, dry product. It helps to get it applied to the seed with a liquid product like this at 4 to 6 ounces per 100 pounds of seed. And this product is from our partner company Elevate Ag, who has another good lineup of other products as well, for in-furrow and foliar application. The next products that we've started to carry because people have asked about it is a couple of AEA products. So BioCoat Gold has been a pretty commonly asked about product. Again, a mycorrhizal fungi product of 8 different species, and then another diverse list of bacterial species, including nitrogen and phosphorus solubilizing bacteria. This product, say compared to the microgreen, has a little bit extra with the kelp as a microbial food source and potassium to help with stronger roots and seedling vigor, and then some humic acid in there just really to help support the microbial population in there. Humic acid really acts as a home for those microbes. Again, we can apply this on the seed as a dry product to any of the mixes. And as I go back to AEA's products, the one I didn't put in here, but we do carry, is their Seed Flare. The only reason I didn't put it in here is it is not, it's just a mineral nutrient product, so not really a biological product, but can be beneficial with the micronutrients that it has in it if you have some of those soils that are lacking some of those micronutrients. And then this last slide here are just some other resources that we have available. And certainly there's more out there. Dr. James White has a really good YouTube video on our YouTube page going over the rhizophagy cycle. We have a biological webinar series that we did a couple years ago. And then Dr. Christine Jones has a really good webinar series as well, kind of going over, nutrient relations in the soil. And these people are certainly, you know, have a vast more education and experience than what I do, and they can really help direct you, and guide you hopefully in a direction that you need to take your soil. Um, so with that, that's really what I have. Again, I wanted to do a basic approach of how do we know we have biology in the soil and what we can do to increase that biology in the soil. So I think with that, Keith, I think we would be ready for questions.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Dylan, for that good overview. And like he said, I would encourage you to look at some of these resources. Jonathan is popping them into the chat. There are that webinar series with Christine Jones has surpassed 300,000 views now. So it's just been incredibly popular because she's such a wealth of information. And James White, if you haven't listened to Rhizophagy, it blew my mind. I have to I have to watch that over and over again just to pick up little pieces of it here and there. But a number of questions here, Dylan. Folks, we'd encourage you to go ahead and put your questions in that Q&A box, or you can throw them through the chat and we can try to catch them there as well. But Dylan, I know one of the questions that a lot of people sometimes ask is, you talked about the rhizobia, for the legumes. Is it kind of one type of rhizobia fits all legumes, or are there specific things? And then is that something that I have to do every year?
Yeah, so that's certainly a good question. Yeah, a lot of legumes require specific rhizobia. Some, there's some legumes that take the same rhizobia, but yeah, it does take a diverse amount. Like I believe the cowpea and mung bean use the same rhizobia, but a soybean uses a different one. Your peas and vetch and lentils, I think, all use the same rhizobia, but it's different than those others. So that's why that's why we worked with Umahari to come up with that product to a broad spectrum. So especially when we get more diverse mixes, we're not going to apply two or three different bacteria to there. We just apply one product, and then it's got the extra free living nitrogen fixing bacteria and the phosphorus solubilizing bacteria. And to answer your question about, do you need to apply it every year? I mean, if I guess if you really know that you have that bacteria in your soil, I would say you maybe don't have to, but it's really no more than that product, no more than investment is in that product. It's really kind of cheap insurance just to have that in there. Then you know that you have that bacteria on the seed and your legumes are going to be able to fixate the nitrogen you need.
Yeah, so since you brought up cost, I'm sure that, in today's economy, everybody's concerned about, costs on these. Can you give just some ballpark figures of what, that rhizobia, the Rhizobac product, with the rhizobia and then also the free living nitrogen fixers, what would that cost to put on a cover crop for on an acre basis or so?
Oh man, I'd have to look again. It's not very much. I think oh man, I should probably know that off the top of my head. I would really have to. It's very very inexpensive. Product. I would just have to look for sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
it seems like, a lot of the mixes that I do for folks, I try to keep that inoculant. If I'm doing the Rhizobac and the elevated fungi, that fungal compost extract, usually that can be at like $1.50,
okay.
the
Yeah.
$1.50 to $2 an acre or something like that. And then of course, mycorrhiza are significantly more expensive because, and the reason is that bacteria can be grown in a lab very, very quickly, and you can explode those populations, so they're relatively cheap. Mycorrhiza or fungal organisms can't be grown in a lab vat like that. They have to be propagated on the roots of other plants, and so it's a more expensive product, and you're going to spend $6 to $12 per acre to put the mycorrhiza on. And so, that just kind of gives a little bit of a ballpark there. And Dylan, one of the things I like to do is For sure, if somebody's doing a perennial planting, I really encourage them to do the mycorrhizal inoculant because those will persist year after year after year and especially in a perennial setting. So 12 bucks an acre, but if it's out there for 20 years, well, that's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, and if you're going to invest, the money into a perennial, you want to do your best to make sure it gets off to a good start and can really
Yeah,
persist.
yeah. And we do it. We're putting the mycorrhiza inoculants on our cash crops, the corn and the soybeans that we're planting, because again, I don't have to see much of a yield bump, to pay for that. On a cover crop, we'll do it or I'll recommend it on situations where the land has just been severely abused. Maybe it's gone through, severe drought or, just some sort of terrible event, where
Yeah.
it needs to recover. And so we don't typically put it on all of our mixes, especially at a full rate. So it kind of depends on the situation and the context there.
Yeah, and I think the key then there, if you're going to put it on a cover crop, just make sure you're following that up with something, another living root, just to make sure that, I think a lot of times the mycorrhiza doesn't necessarily go away, but it doesn't stay active unless you have that living root. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So Annette Thomas has a question. She says, if you're adding biological products to the seed and or in the furrow, continuous no-till grazing livestock, living root, so good soil system, how do you know if you need to apply a foliar product throughout the season?
Well, I'd say I would start with, a visual observation of, just what does the overall health of the plant look like? There's certainly other tests you can do, between, maybe tissue sampling or sap analysis to kind of understand how some of those nutrients are in your plant or moving throughout the plant. Um, another maybe depending on what crop it is. So for instance, in my area, we grow a lot of wheat, so rust is always a big concern coming the spring of the year, and we can watch that rust, which is a fungal disease. We can watch that rust come in from southern Kansas and move on up. So we could take a preventative approach to something like that and spray on a very nice fungal biological product that so now we've added good fungi which can fend off, and keep that plant healthy. The rust still may come in, but if your plant has the health to keep it fended, to keep it from activating on that plant, that's a good indicator. So and another kind of plant that comes to mind is alfalfa. Alfalfa in the spring of the year, you always get, insect pressure. So if you can be adding biological products to these crops and be more preventative rather than reactive, that's really the best way to do it. And again, going back to some of those tests, in your soil, as you continue to increase the healthier soil and you see that on the test, sometimes you may not see the benefits from a biological product because you already have it growing and active in your soil, and your plant's able to just be perfectly healthy and fine that way. Now some of the the harsher soils that are highly bacterial, yeah, you're going to see a big difference because they just don't have that there. So yeah, visual observation. You know, in I mean, in that example there that Annette has, I would imagine she has a pretty good biological population already. But yeah, kind of visual and just knowing how some of these diseases come in on a lot of these plants.
Yeah, and I would kind of add on to that, most foliar applications are going to be some combination of a biological product as well as a nutritional product. And so, like Dylan said, a SAP test can help you determine if you need some micronutrients out there. But then adding a compost extract of some sort, they're relatively inexpensive to do. It's just always a good idea to get biology. And then when you put biology out, you also want some sort of a food source, which is, carbon of some kind. So whether that's a little molasses or some humic acid or something like that. So there's a lot of good products out there. one of the Dylan mentioned Umahari company that we're working with pretty closely on a couple of our products. They've got a product that we're experimenting with that is a nitrogen fixing leaf endophyte, and so an endophyte just simply means a an organism that lives inside the plant. Now, many endophytes live in the root system of the plants and are endophytic and they're helping down there, but there's also a lot of endophytes that can live in the leaf. And so, this is a product that can actually put a nitrogen fixing endophyte that lives in and on the leaf surface of these plants. And so, is it going to fix enough nitrogen for 200 bushel corn? Probably not by itself, but all of these different things are pieces of that puzzle to help us reduce the amount of synthetic nitrogen that we have to put out there. So speaking of endophytes, Dylan, here's a good question for you.
Mhm.
This is from David in Wichita. He says, are there biological amendments containing dark septate endophytes that can be used between harvest of crops and establishment of a solid cover crop?
Oh, that's
I so so I had to look up what that even was, dark septate endophytes. So I did a little bit of research while you were doing your presentation there. So David, I don't see any really commercially available products. The dark septate endophytes that look like they're biological organisms that help with really tough drought conditions or heavy metal contamination, those types of things, kind of rebuilding, remediation type things. Don't see a lot of commercially available products with those. However, what I was able to learn was that they do associate closely with mycorrhiza. And so probably the best thing you can do, and certainly if you've got ground that has gone through some stressing event like a drought or some sort of contamination, mycorrhiza would definitely be the best thing to put out there. And it appears that these dark septate endophytes associate closely with mycorrhiza. So my guess is if you can build your mycorrhiza population, some of these other things may just naturally come. But I'm not aware of commercial products. However, like the elevated fungi product that we have, Dylan, I think on the screen that has over 90 different types of fungi, and that's just the ones that they can identify. And we send that in to do the DNA testing. But the cool thing is there's a lot of the DNA in these products that they don't even know what it is yet. So there's organisms in our soil and in some of these products. God created such an incredibly complex system. We don't even know what a lot of it is yet. And so there's organisms out there that are working to help fix the soil. Nature is a self-healing system. And so many of these things are in the soils and will come under the right conditions to help fix that. So hope it's okay that I took that one for you.
no, you're fine. That's a new one to me.
um, okay, so Sue is asking, would you recommend using sap analysis during the growing season so that you can compare with your soil analysis and make any further biological amendments if necessary?
Yeah, those can certainly certainly help. So a soil analysis is going to tell you, especially on the Haney soil test, what's available to your plant. It's going to give you, kind of it's going to give you I believe the Malick recommendation or the Malick form of the nutrients in the soil, but then also what's going to be available to that plant. Another soil test that I didn't cover because it really doesn't correlate, I don't think, much with soil biology is just a TND test, which gives you an overall view of the nutrients available in your soil. Or yeah, the not necessarily what's available to the plant, but nutrients that the total amount of nutrients that are in your soil. So that's where you can use some of these biologicals to make that available. So as you start comparing some of these soil samples, and then looking at the sap analysis, are the nutrients that you're getting on the soil samples moving up in that plant? Because when you pull a sap analysis, you take an old leaf and a new leaf, so it gives you an idea of how those nutrients are moving throughout that plant. The big thing to be aware of with the SAP analysis is making sure that you um, get that sample sent as soon as possible. Don't let it sit around all day. If it's going to be, I think if it's going to be a day or two, put it in a cooler, keep it cooled somehow, because they really need to. You don't want that sap drying up, and if you can, you need to really overnight that. I believe New Age Labs is out of Minnesota, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's the one we have in the States. There's other labs that do it as well, but that would be the one that I guess is probably going to be able to be shipped to the easiest. So yeah, you can start to look at how the soil nutrients are moving up into that plant, and that's a good
Yeah.
indication of the health of the plant and how the biology is actively moving those nutrients from the soil to the plant.
Yeah, I've heard people like John Kemp and Thomas Dykstra, who are experts on sap testing, talk about sap testing as like you go to the doctor and you get a blood test and they can kind of predict what might be coming for you and say, okay, you need to get your iron levels up or you need to get this level up. So it's more of a proactive type approach to health, whether it's in a human blood test or sap test in a plant. Whereas a tissue test, they said tissue test is a bit more like an autopsy. You can find out what went wrong, but by the time you figure it out, it may be too late to do anything. And so there's places for both, but the most reactive or the most proactive thing you can do is a sap test. And it's probably going to tell you more about the nutrient levels of the plant and what additional, micronutrients are needed. But you can learn about the biology from, if you're consistently seeing certain minerals or certain nutrients always lacking in your plants, you could start doing some research on what specific biological organisms do I need. I'm always low in boron. Okay, what organisms help make boron more available in the soil? And so then you can start trying to figure out a biological approach to making those things available. Because, like Dylan said, with the total nutrient digestion test, it's going to tell you you've got boron in your soil. It's just not available to your plants. And so that's a really good tool to use to try to figure out what biology you may need in the future. Another question here. Jeff is asking if you add the fungal seed treatment on cover crop and cash crop year after year in a no-till system, then will the soil profile eventually have sufficient levels to the point that no seed treatment is needed each year? So, in other words, do I have to put these things on every year?
Well, I guess I would probably, need to there's a few more questions I think I would have, follow-up questions in context. As you start to use these, are you still using a lot of these synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides? I'm not saying that they're not, I don't want to say that they are not a good tool to use. I think a lot of times they're an overused tool, but the more if you don't, I believe if you don't start backing those off, you're going to have to continue to add the biology because, the salts from the fertilizers, are going to, kill off some biology. There's other, fungicides kill off fungus, both good and bad. Or they're there to take care of the bad fungus, but they also kill the good fungus. Your other pesticide products, have been, known to do that as well. So, yes, I think, over time, if you start to follow, I believe you start to follow the principles of soil health and you start to maybe reduce tillage, reduce the synthetics, eventually, eventually you will build up, I think, that biology to a point to where, yeah, you may not need it because you have stopped killing it off, basically. Livestock integration is another one. That rumen is basically a vat of microbes. And as you properly graze, not just throw the cattle out there for a free for all, properly grazing, moving that livestock, depositing that manure and urine, you're just depositing just piles of microbes. And that's, good active soil. As you look at those cow pies, they're going to break down fast. probably if you pull them up, you should see earthworm activity under there. So there's a lot more into it than just I've used them for 5 years. Now I shouldn't have to because I've built up the population.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a case by case basis for each farm. So I guess my thought would be as you continue to use these, test the strip, use a little bit less or back off some synthetics, and just you're gonna have to do some on-farm testing, I think, to where okay, there is no return to using these anymore.
Yeah.
And then you know that your biology is there and active.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, in other words, in an ideal system, yes, eventually you could stop using them, but very few of us farm in an
Yeah.
ideal, completely natural system. And so, yeah, best thing to do is to run a strip test and put it out there. And if you see no difference, you see no change, then that probably indicates you don't need that particular product, or you can that particular, you can do this for biology or, fertility. But if you have to do those experiments yourself, and with most people's equipment, application equipment, GPS and all that, it's never been easier to do those sorts of things to prove to yourself. Um, so kind of on that topic, Raphael is asking, you'd love to hear your thoughts on the trade-off between chemical and mechanical termination of cover crops. Specifically, to what extent, if I use herbicides to kill my cover crops, what extent does that undermine the soil health benefits they're supposed to provide, especially in terms of the impact on soil microbiology? That's a great question.
Yeah. And not, I'm still not sure what I think my thought and opinion on that is again based on context. Um, I believe Christine Jones mentioned that tillage is probably the lesser of the two evils as long as you're following up with a growing crop after that to continue to feed the biology. My thought around it, so really where I am here in West Central Kansas, um, one tillage event in our open area and some of the winds we get, I would prefer a chemical pass on cover crops in my area because now we still have the residue there. Yeah, maybe we destroyed a little bit more biology than what tillage does, but we can't always till and then follow with a cover crop because sometimes the moisture just is not there for us. So, based on your context is going to be what your parameters, I mean, your choice of termination should be. Um, I think probably tillage probably does kill less again, as long as you're following it up with a growing cover. Um, but further east where they get more rain, they have maybe more trees, wind erosion maybe isn't quite as extreme as it is here, that's probably an okay approach. Again, for us out here, we really need to keep that residue out there. So tillage to me just isn't, it's
Yeah,
just
I,
not
I
part of
think
the
I think
option.
that's a great point, Dylan, and you really have to look at that context and also what your goals are. And there's probably quite a difference also in the chemicals that are being used to kill it. We've all heard that Roundup, was originally patented as a biological, killer, a fungicide type product. And so it's probably more harsh on the biology than some other types of chemistry. So again, those are things you're going to have to kind of look into yourself, but it doesn't do any good to have all the biology and then have all your soil blow away. So like Dylan said, that's largely going to determine, and that's why we love planting cover crops in July and August. Yeah, after wheat harvest, that's an absolute no-brainer because you can plant cover crops, for the majority of the country, you can time that to where they're all going to be killed by the frost. And so then you don't have to worry about tillage or herbicide. It's a timing thing and just let the winter take it out. That's ideal. But obviously that doesn't fit all situations
Yeah.
or scenarios, but certainly take advantage of any of those cultural, climate type practices as well when it comes to
Keith,
that.
yeah, Keith, something I would add to the herbicide approach, if that is what you would have to do, adding like a sugar source or a carbon source, a humic acid. that can help buffer those herbicides a little bit as you're applying it to the soil, so it can help buffer for that biology a little bit. It's not going to keep it totally safe, but it is an option as well, to make it a little less.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And also not just for the chemistries like that, but also when you're putting on the higher salt fertility,
Yeah.
commercial fertilizers, if you can add some humic acid or some molasses or a carbon source, it helps kind of buffer that effect. That buffers the biology to some of the harshness of what you're putting out there. A few other questions here. You talked about testing for these different organisms, and I know that uh, one of the hardest things to test for is mycorrhiza fungi. Again, it's different than testing for bacteria. And I just wanted to mention here, and because I see that he's on the webinar here, our friend Willie Pretorius. Willie, originally from South Africa, is working part-time with Ward Labs, but also is kind of off on his own now with his own consulting business. Willie has done he has lots of experience in testing of mycorrhiza, and I'm going to paste his website in reconstructag.com. He's come up with a pretty innovative new way of testing mycorrhiza colonization in plants. It used to be you had to stain the roots and get them under a microscope to actually see what's going on. Willie's got some unique ways of doing that with it's kind of like a PLFA test, but it's called an NLFA test. And I think it's being run through Ward Labs, but it's kind of a test that Willie developed that is an easier, faster, quicker way to determine whether you've got mycorrhizal colonization. So you might want to check that out if that is something of interest to you. So, Dylan, you brought up Western Kansas, where you're at out there, very dry land, harsh environment. We have an anonymous attendee here who is asking, what's your advice for dryland farmers, particularly those in the driest parts of the plains? Hint, hint, talking your area in terms of whether or how they should use biologicals. So how do you think about that differently, in Western Kansas versus Iowa, for example?
Well, yeah, I mean, so moisture is your limiting factor. And I think the first approach you have to take is from a really a financial approach. If you've been experiencing, I don't think there's a biological out there that's going to save your crop from a drought. There's more to getting through droughts than just using one biological.
No, no silver bullet.
Yeah, yeah. So I think for that, a biological at planting, I think is a good idea, either on the seed or in furrow, because you know, you're not gonna, you generally we have more moisture in the spring of the year, and you want to give that plant the best start it can, to get out of the ground, to get that root system vigorous. The more vigorous you can make that root system, the more chance you have of getting through some droughts. Um, as you progress through the season, if it's really dry, you're gonna have to, I think you're gonna have to make that determination based off, okay, a biological isn't gonna save my crop, but can it get me to maybe that next rain? Can it keep the plant healthy enough to get through the next rain? If you can hold on, sometimes if you can hold on another week, I mean, it's not gonna be any bin buster, but it can certainly, help save a little bit of yield compared to maybe somebody not using a product like that. I think something else too to keep in mind, in our drier environments is just trying to reduce trying to where you can, again, I feel you always need to test this, but trying to reduce some of those saltier fertilizers at the beginning, because I mean, think about it, as you apply high salt fertilizers, what does salt do? It absorbs moisture. So it absorbs it from where? Out of your soil, and now it's not available to the plants. So, trying to incorporate those biologicals early. Um, and then, yeah, just really looking at your forecast, long term, short term. If I use this biological now as a foliar treatment, is it going to, like I said, get you another week to get to the next drain? That that would be my approach. Like I said, yeah, there is no silver bullet. There is no, if it's dry, it's dry.
Yeah, and one of the things I always think about when people ask questions about this or talk about very arid areas, I always think back to, Dwayne Beck was he's probably had more influence on the agriculture industry here on the plains than anybody else that I know of in our generation. So Dwayne Beck he's retired now, but he was the manager of the Dakota Lakes Research Station up in South Dakota. And he talks extensively about making sure the intensity of your rotation fits your climate, fits where you're at. And the intensity of your rotation, what he talks about is, how many crops are you trying to get in, within your rotation? How often do they come? How long of break periods do you have? Cover crops can either add to or take away from some of that intensity. But one of the biggest things is growing a forage crop versus a grain crop, because it takes about half the moisture to grow probably 80% of the vegetative biomass of a plant and the other half of the moisture to get it all the way to grain. So if you're in a dry area, you may have to start really questioning whether or not, especially a dry area in a drought, should you be growing grain crops? And if you have the ability to grow more of a forage-based system, you can get a crop with far less moisture. And then the biology becomes, a much more important factor. Because oftentimes in a drought, you'll grow a plant, you just won't harvest grain.
Mhm.
So, those are all things to think about. Now, I know not everybody can switch over to a livestock-based system, but, these are things that you just have to challenge yourself with and think about of, is the intensity of my rotation appropriate for where I live and the climatic conditions that I'm faced with? And sometimes we have to say, no, it's not quite right. What do I need to do to adjust? So, anyway, those are always fun things to think about. Well, Dylan, we're kind of up against our time. I know there's a couple questions that we did not get to. We'll try to roll those over into next week. Like Jonathan said earlier, we will be doing a Ask Me Anything webinar next Wednesday. So we hope you can tune in for that. It'll be Zach and I. Uh, Specifically, ask me anything about cover crops. But hey, if you need dating advice or parenting advice or, meaning of life advice, I'm sure we'll have things to say on that topic as well. So join us next week for that. It should be a lot of fun. Bring your questions to that, and we will try to answer those. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. It's been our pleasure to host this series, and we hope that you've enjoyed it as much as we have. These videos, the whole series, will be posted on our YouTube channel. All the previous ones already are. This one will be out there soon. So if you have someone else that should be listening to this, send them over there. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you, Dylan. Appreciate your good information and good luck having that baby today.
All right. Thank you. See you
All
guys.
right. Goodbye, everybody.